So it's my pleasure to be introducing our next session with Marjora Carter. The first time I heard of Marjora's work was a few years ago. I had been invited as a CLEO to participate in a symposia, the intersection of cities and climate. And I really wanted to bring something meaningful to the conversation. And I was putting together my PowerPoint, and I wanted to end it with a quote that could really wrap up the message that I was trying to convey. And that's how I fell upon Marjora's work. And the quote is that you shouldn't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. And that's actually the subtitle of her new book, which is Reclaiming Your Community. I want to mention that the first 75 ticket buyers of this symposium will be receiving a copy of this book in the next few weeks. And I'm keeping a copy as well for myself. Marjora is an author, a real estate developer, urban revitalization strategy consultant, MacArthur Fellow, and Peabody Award-winning broadcaster. She's responsible for the creation and successful implementation of numerous economic developments, technology and green infrastructure projects, policies, and job training and placement systems. She has firsthand experience pioneering sustainable economic development in one of America's most storied low-status communities, the South Bronx. And I'd also like to introduce her moderator, Jennifer Posner, who is the Senior Manager for Policy and Programs at the University of Miami's Office of Civic and Community Engagement, who are doing incredible things at the intersection of climate and community. So without further ado, Marjora, the floor is yours.
Oh, good. There we go. Hi, how are you guys? Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to quickly share my screen and spend a very quick 15 minutes going through some stuff. And then I'm so delighted I'll be talking to Jen. So first, I just wanted to share just a little bit about where I come from and how I got to be where I am right now. And so it literally started, literally I grew up in the burning Bronx. And that's the era that it was called, because the years of financial disinvestment, and I'm sure some of you are already like, well, what's it got to do with climate? I'll tell you. And so years of disinvestment literally created, and especially in many, poor communities of color around the country, created this sort of like financial, infrastructure that made it so that landlords were torching their buildings to collect insurance money because there was nothing else coming in. And so we in the Bronx, in the South Bronx, which was also the poster child for so much of the economic blight and urban blight that was just, symbolic of that period, was what I grew up in. That economic blight kind of created more opportunities for the environmental blight that we experienced, because when my dad moved to the community back in the 1940s, what we saw were those walk to work communities, which was, light manufacturing, and people who lived in the residential section would walk to the other part. What we would often see there now was waste infrastructure, power plant infrastructure, sewage sludge pelletizing plants infrastructure coming in, and which is basically sort of an attack on the public health systems within people that lived in those neighborhoods. And so, but what it really left us with was the feeling that people within our own communities was that we needed to measure success by how far we got away from them, that there was really, brain drain doesn't just happen in quote unquote developing countries. It happens in America, in American low status communities, the kind of places, the way we call low status, it's a state. It's not like people in those neighborhoods are just left to be, that there's something wrong with them, but inequality is assumed in those areas. And it's where you'll find, lower health outcomes, lower educational attainment, higher rates of folks being involved in the justice system, higher rates of more environmental burdens in those communities. And so for us to see that type of infrastructure in our community absolutely made us feel as though we should measure success by how far we should get away from it. But what was interesting for us was the ability to see, beyond it. So I felt like it was a defeat when I used education to get away from my community and then had to come back home under duress, because when I got into graduate school, I got into NYU. And so which meant that the cheapest place for me to stay was at my parents' house. So I had to move back home to the community. But that's having education and some distance. That's when I discovered that our community was literally kind of like on the chopping block from our state and our and our city, because they wanted to build more waste facilities in the community. And that's when I realized that, and thankfully I did have some education and some distance that allowed me to sort of see my community in a different way. Because we were a poor community of color and thus vulnerable, we were thus targeted for all of the type of environmental burdens that usually wealthier and whiter communities in our city were able to avoid. And that's when I just realized, okay, I can pretend I don't see this. And frankly, no one would blame me for feeling that way, because, there's a long history, of the talented ones, in communities like mine, being siphoned off to some extent, to go off and build their fortunes elsewhere. But what does that mean for the communities that are left, for the people that are left behind? And, it's almost as if poverty is considered a cultural attribute in those communities and that they're going to manage it. And so that's when I realized I wanted to be a part of a change that could happen within our communities. But you did absolutely use, sustainability as a trajectory for that. Because again, we started working around solid waste management plan and creating a more sustainable one that didn't openly discriminate against poor people of color, in the city of New York, which is where they were citing all of these noxious facilities. And we started asking ourselves, well, what are we fighting for? Like, we know what we're fighting against, but what are we fighting for? And that's when I was approached and got wind of a grant program, small grant program around from the U.S. Forest Service that was doing very targeted work in America's urban and very threatened rivers. And the Bronx River was one of them. And so I ended up writing a small grant for $10,000, to do restoration work along the Bronx River. And I didn't even realize we had a Bronx River. I mean, I saw it on a subway map. You could see it, sort of visually. But, even though there was a bridge to get out of the neighborhood when we would go out of it, I could see that there was some kind of body of water, but it didn't read as river. To be honest, it was like industry on either side, and it was just like, who would want to go there? But then we realized this is actually a tidal river. It's brackish. It's got some great things going on to it. And because I was able to discover it, that's when I realized this could actually be the beginning of our community's transformation in terms of how it felt about itself. And so we took that little seed grant. We paid for lunch for people. We did some small, little public art projects, just to get people to even think about the opportunity of having a natural asset like that within our community. And so this was the beta version. But then we had to work on really, even though people would say that they would take their kids, and we know they did, they would take their kids out of the neighborhood to experience parks because we didn't have them in the community. But even when we started working on having one there, people were still kind of like, oh, there's a park here? No, there's not. And then they wouldn't even go. And so we had to create the right environment for people to feel like they could do something like that. So we started to build programming into the park itself, whether it was boat building or environmental stewardship or just canoe rides or parties or movie nights. It was just to get people down to see that this natural asset was something that belonged in their community. And so we did that for a number of years, and then we use that to leverage, our ability to sort of see ourselves in a different way. And I love this photo of me because you can see I'm literally just posing in it. And it's because, it was we were groundbreaking for the for a $3 million fund that was going into redevelop that park. And so I was like, look, I did my 7 years of work. Now y'all do it. From there you go. But it went from this was a photo of it after about at least 6 cleanups, because this was before the era of camera phones. You take a picture of everything. Back then, you literally had to think about it. Now you don't. But anyway, that's why I don't have earlier pictures. But then we went from this beta version into this, which is the Hunts Point Riverside Park as it exists right now. And it really did become this thing that allowed people to sort of see itself in a really beautiful way that they hadn't before, because no one thought about having beautiful things like this within their own community. That, the guys that, could go fishing right there and do things and play in the park like this. And what was really also fascinating about this site was that during Hurricane Sandy, everything was flooded, but because this was here in this like very natural, porous, beautiful vegetated surface, a lot of it didn't go into some of the surrounding businesses, which I thought was a really helpful thing for us as well, as a community. So we were excited about that. But again, it's become this beautiful place that people see themselves. And this is me. I actually did get married there back in the day. Actually, almost 16 years ago now. And that's the dog that literally pulled me into the site, because I would not have gone into that dump if I didn't have like a really crazy big 80-pound dog with me, so there you go. It was nice. And so having that, there really makes us feel as though we've done something good. But again, we really did feel as though we had to like continue to put the idea, we won a national award for excellence in urban design because of the role that this park played on the community's development. But we also really work to help people in our community feel as though they had both a personal and a financial stake in improving the environment as well. Because, we realized that, frankly, a lot of folks, we were like Latino and Black in our community. Most people felt that the environment was something that happened outside of our community and something that white people did. And so we really had to help people see the value of having that, something that was like so close to them so that they could see the impact of it, but also feel it as well. And so we actually started a Greenway Steward program because we had a green collar job training and placement system that had an amazing success rate. We worked specifically with folks that did work that came out of, the criminal justice system, and they were, returning, and folks that were, on public, that were, on public assistance. And, we had an amazing success rate, like more than 85% of the folks that we worked with actually got jobs within the fields of environmental remediation, and all that, and kept those jobs, for years, which was really exciting. And we also hired some as a part of the Greenway Steward program. And so basically, because we also knew that we had to change the minds of people within our community so that the environment was something that was closer to them. And so by doing so, we, literally, they were the ambassadors for sustainability within the community. And I show you this photo because when our team first started going out talking about the environment, people literally said, "We hate the tree. This is a tree like directly overhead." And they were like, "Well, why do you hate this tree?" And it was because the branches were so low that that's the light from that big street light actually couldn't venture through underneath where that tree was. And it became, that spot under the tree became a place where a lot of illegal activity would happen. And so people were just like, blamed it on the tree. It was really funny, but they did. And then, so what our people did, the Greenway Stewards did, they just did a strategic pruning of the tree, which made it so that suddenly they were heroes of the neighborhood. They also, again, used the fact that they were local people in their community and changed the idea of what could possibly, why a tree should have low branches. This was in front of a senior citizen center. So they kept the branches low so that the folks, who were in the senior citizen center could come outside and sit down under the shade of a lovely tree. We also did, we didn't have any money for marketing, so we did literally rented a line painter and just spray painted a line that went all the way, from the interior of the community down onto the waterfront parks as well. And it was just this really beautiful way to get people to think about it. We also worked on, sustainable stormwater management as ways to, help entice the people, in our community to understand that there was something that our community could do to be a part of the change that would needed to be happening in terms of thwarting climate change and make it, because frankly, it was poor communities of color that were most impacted by it. So we worked on the development of two really key pieces of green roof legislation, because for those of you who don't know, I'm sure everybody at CLEO knows what this is. Vegetated surfaces actually, are just cooler. They actually help alleviate urban heat island effects, unlike, tar roofs or bituminous roofs, because they actually sort of like hold in, the heat as opposed to like actually getting it out in the air. So it's a really awesome thing where it's just like, it just keeps the ambient temperature of an area lower, which is, of course, helps with climate change. And so we also did things like, actually do public projects to show people the impact of things like green and cool roofs, on the environment. And then we were also able, to not to create these type of projects, but we also created businesses that allowed people from our community to be employed in them as well. And so this was the test camp, and this was we would be visited by all sorts of wildlife, including this hawk, which we renamed Hank. And so, but we started local businesses around this as well. And this was a group called Smart Roofs, which was a green roof installation business that we started as a way to, first of all, employ people from our community. We also did another piece of legislation, or actually got pushed another piece of legislation that allowed for business owners and residential owners to actually get a $4.50 square foot tax abatement on new roofs, which allowed them to actually, even though green roofs were more expensive, they could get one of these roofs and actually get a tax abatement for a number of years. And actually, so doing this, I was actually the first customer that we did it with, but the whole idea is creating these opportunities so that once we move forward, these kind of opportunities are the things that actually help our communities be a part of the climate change that's needed in order to create more opportunities. But I've since moved then to my own consulting business and real estate development business, but still very much focused on the kind of communities that I'm in, which is, the kind of communities that many people are led to believe that you measure success by how far you get away from them. But we always knew that there was all sorts of talent within our communities. We're entrepreneurs, we're healthcare providers, doctors, this woman on the left with the Coze with my Rose t-shirt, she's from the neighborhood across this river from mine, and owns a wildly successful company called the Lit Bar, which stands for Lit Like Literature, Lit Like Tipsy, because it's a combination bookstore wine bar. Just the really amazing kind of assets that exist in our community. Also the kind of people that we attract, all sorts of fun folks like Marcus Samuelson, who's a big foodie and someone who owns several restaurants in New York City and beyond, comes up to visit at times. Young man in the middle is an actor named Christian Navarro, who's from the neighborhood, and he's just a really great person to be around. And so, but lastly, we realized that in communities like ours, there were people who believed that there's still no value in it. And that was the type of development that we wanted to help people understand, that that's not true, right? But if you ask folks in communities like ours, in particular young people, what do you think the community needs now? They'll say things like, well, we need more homeless shelters, more opportunities for very low income housing, affordable housing for really poor people. People are sick, so we, diabetes and obesity and heart conditions. So we need more, healthcare clinics, and we need more, pharmacies for things like that. And, we need, more programs for the little kids to keep them out of trouble. And we were just like, this is really interesting. So we know that because statistically right now, kids this age graduating and going on to college, we've had more of them over the past 5 years than they have within the past 30. And so when we asked them, so what do you want to do, with your life after you graduate and go to college? They were just like, not stay here. And we realized that the idea that many of these young people have is that there's no value in our community. And the way that the nonprofit industrial complex looks at our community is that there's not that much more, that poverty is part of the DNA. So we work to manage it. But when we ask people in our own communities, well, what do you think we need? What are you looking for in the community you desire? They brought up the things that we know people are looking for, in their own, in other communities, in middle class communities. It's the restaurants, it's the bars, it's the great parks, which we do have, housing, economically diverse housing that matches their income. It's things like that. Those are the things that make people feel good about their communities. But we realize that there's two different options that people often share within their community, that we see happening in low status communities, the kind that actually produces, gentrification, or the kind that produces these kind of the kind of things that make people feel like they don't want to be in their community. We call them poverty level economic maintenance. And that's the kind that whether it's not so healthy food, is the kind of economic developments and shops that make you wish you could shop someplace else. It's more 99-cent stores as your main retail opportunity. It's, the multi-billion-dollar economic engine that, that does treat, many of the lifestyle illnesses that are prevalent in low status communities. And it's, of course, the places where you can get self-medicated. If you want money, if you want to like actually invest your money, you're not going to find places to do it in your own community. And last but definitely not least, lots of very highly subsidized, affordable housing that gives people, and with all of this, what it tends to do is concentrate poverty and concentrate all the things associated with it, from low health outcomes, low educational attainment, higher rates of people being involved in the justice system, and I think most perniciously, a lack of hope. But let's recognize it, just because we don't often see the value in communities like that, many folks do. Predatory speculators definitely do. And they're getting in the way of our community's generational wealth. And because if we don't see the value in it, they'll buy early and cheap. But also, we're not meeting the supply for the kind of, reurbanized land that gentrifying development kind of looks at. The fact that millennials and baby boomers are looking for the same type of land, trading shorter commutes for cars and having smaller homes in proximity to shops and things of that nature. But this is why, I'll close it here. This is the kind of approach to real estate development that we're really looking at for low status communities that are beautiful, that acknowledge that there needs to be a high quality built and natural environment, that there's the kind of commercial, year-round spaces that make people feel really good about themselves, that, we're building community, not just with community centers, but with the activity that's in them and in the other, social spaces, the third spaces that are around, that you're creating more, housing for local residents with real good paying jobs, and that we're not, we're not using, this crazy opportunity that is climate change that we can use as community redevelopment, instead using it as a way to continue this idea that poverty is a cultural attribute, within those communities, even though we're often the ones that are most vulnerable about it. And I'll talk a little bit about more what that means, I guess, in Q&A, and as we go forward. But ultimately, we've done more around creating opportunities for things like, the cafes, the parks, we're working on housing that matches people's income. We're working on, creating the kind of community space that also provides opportunities for people to be invested in it, and really using that as sort of like a foundation for people to realize that this is an opportunity, especially as as the climate is changing. How are we also including, people of color, people that are more vulnerable populations within the community development trends that are going forward, so that we're not always at the receiving end of the bad stuff.
Okay, well, I guess we're good. We're done then. I think you've answered everything. It's great to see, Marjora. This was really, I think this was, you really, I think, sort of brought together how, climate justice, climate, sustainable planning and building is just kind of a part of the everyday life of cities. I mean, it's really kind of inextricable from creating healthy places,
right?
Livable places. I have literally 100 questions for you, but I'm going to try to respond to what you shared. I think one of the things that you just talked about is how do you bring in people in the community who have sort of been on the receiving end of just historic, kind of consistent disinvestment. So in these communities with deep historic roots of inequalities, what are ways that you engage community members to invest in their neighborhoods and kind of reverse these trends and this dialogue? And how do you encourage participation, particularly in places with communities and people that are understandably wary of promises that have been made and broken time and time again?
It's so interesting because, like I literally grew up when stuff was burning around us. And one of my earliest memories of just that in particular was when Jimmy Carter, who was the presidential candidate, came to the South Bronx. And my last name is Carter. Okay. Although I think I've got somebody else's name on this computer, sorry. As my husband, I forgot that. And so I remember sitting around the kitchen table and my mom saying, "Oh yeah, President Carter's in town," and it's like, he seems like a nice man, but nothing's going to change. And I just remember that like it was yesterday that it was everybody promising everything and it was just and nothing changed. And I was just like, I don't ever want to do that. So that's why, frankly, I've been like dead focused on doing only project-based development. So whether it doesn't have to be a huge change, but it does, people do need to see something change. And I know early especially early in my career, it was really, sometimes it was as simple, as, you saw that crazy park and what it looked like. I mean, it was a dump, literally. But even just every time we moved something out, it was kind of like, wait, it's looking, I can see the river, or I can see something. And just creating that opportunity for people to recognize that there can be a change. And it doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be different than what was there before. That's how people start to feel like, oh, wait, so yeah, this isn't talk. This is actually something. And I find people are so forgiving when people actually do try. That's the thing that I love about the work that we're collectively doing is, and yes, people can be distrusting and there's all sorts of reasons why they should be. But I think ultimately it's been my experience that people will, you can have your haters or whatever, but because you're still stepping out in the game that you're working in, there will be others who will see you and it will inspire them too.
That's great. I think I think sometimes in planning, particularly, we try to have these huge plans and it's not the way to, it's historically shown it's not the way to go.
No.
It's speaking of planning and sort of policy circles, in this kind of mindset, we often talk in like a word soup of jargon that I think can really deepen divides and lead to a lot of mistrust.
Mm-hmm.
You have really, I think, cornered the market on using really simple, evocative terms like low status, self-gentrification. Can you share more about how you kind of arrived at these terms and ways that you have found to encourage the real kind of honest dialogue about climate-related concerns?
I have, and then I'll also tell you that, part of that is also being mindful of like what triggers people too. So like for low status, it was I mean, I didn't make any of these phrases up myself, but I've heard folks use them. And when the first time I heard low status used as a way to describe the communities that we talk about, we usually describe as either low income or disadvantaged, under resourced, blah, blah, blah. There was a way that this writer, her name is Dana Boyd, used it to sort of like determine equality. That was very different, that didn't automatically put in race or geography. And I was just like, so inequality is just assumed in some areas. And that's how they're treated politically, philanthropically. And I was just like, and it was very disturbing to me. It really was. And because I was just like, wait a second, people are being written off before we start. But that's how it's used. And that's why it's like, is poverty a cultural attribute, or are we putting that on those communities? And so what I realized that the discussion around low status, because initially people do go like, you can't say that about people. And I was like, I'm not saying that about people. I'm saying it how people are treated, period, in those communities. And then they go, and I'm like, show me differently. And they can't. And then they go, oh, okay. Whereas self-gentrification was, again, the first time I heard it, I was just like, yeah, why can't people have nice things too in our communities? And a whole bunch of other people did too, felt the same way. But others were just like, this is the worst thing. And we can't believe that you're using gentrification in any way that sounds like a good thing. And so guess what? We don't use it anymore. We just don't, because it literally was defined, by this the head of a historically Black college down in Charlotte, North Carolina, who talked about it with regard to the development that was happening right outside of their university in the town that it was located in, and some community groups that were working on the development and the financial institutions that actually financed it, but there were some people in the community who were just saw development and thought, oh, we must be being gentrified out of it. And it was just, and he was like, look who's doing it. Like, these are your neighbors. It's like, this is development that's by you and for you. But again, not everybody felt that way. And we just had to, and it was just such a traumatic experience for some folks that we were just like, it's more important that we can actually have conversations. But if people can't even do it for their whatever reason, we're going to change it. So it's just being mindful about what you're hearing people say, and then respecting that.
Yeah, makes sense. Kind of just sort of zooming out a little bit, I think successful projects, successful kind of revitalization efforts often emerge from really kind of dogged determination of community champions like you. In your role, and when you were kind of starting out, how did you identify who would be the most, impactful partners in the work that you were trying to do? Like, how do you bring together, what are the different roles you bring together to kind of achieve this development alchemy?
Yeah. I mean, what's so interesting is, look, I believe that there ain't no power like the power of the people, of course. However, we often can't get things financed the way we want. We often don't have the political power that we would like. And so it sometimes really is about creating, sort of somewhat strange bedfellows, and then identifying, what is it that you're looking for, because you don't have to become friends. Like, you're not trying to date anybody, unless you are. That's up to y'all. But mostly it's about, can you find the things to agree upon that's actually going to help meet the needs that you need to get moving, and then frankly, kind of like not being able to be too distracted by anything else, unless it's like so hyper awful that you have to be like, no, we got to check this like right now. But for the most part, like, we've literally had partners and pretty much everything we've done, that, for example, like when we worked around building the park, one of our partners was literally the same city agency that one part of it we were suing, for the work that they were doing around, their utter mismanagement around solid waste management. If I was just like, I don't work with you because of that, we never would have gotten our park done, ever. And it's just, so we need to be real clear about, let's not cut off our nose, to spite our faces, and being really mindful about, what the long game is, because that's how we've got to play this.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, I think when you and I spoke a couple of months ago, I was telling you, kind of comparing my experience working in New York to being in Miami, where we have 34 different municipalities within one county. So, but, I don't think anything New York is so notorious for roadblocks and bottlenecks, and even Donald Trump characterized it as difficult to get things done. So what, for people in both of our cities who are trying to get things done in these systems that are really hard to navigate, are there suggestions, for kind of ways to circumnavigate or, find other ways to kind of, creative solutions, I guess, that you could recommend?
I mean, I feel like we spent a lot of time, really trying to understand the communities in which we were working in. And some of that, a lot of it had to do, with, we would, support advisory boards. And by support, I literally mean like, we would, host these dinners and, and just like, identify who were the sort of like the non-traditional leaders in a community, and, and literally say, look, we've got some dinner, some wine. These are the things we want to work on. We really want your feedback. And just like, that's it. And people would be like, nobody's asked me for that before. And come to find it, and honestly, we can say that all of our projects have gotten better as a result of that, rather intentional level of feedback and putting it in front of people, so that then we could take those ideas and run with them, whether it's in our community or wherever we're working around, the country. And it really is, I think, giving people an opportunity to support your work and support the vision that is ultimately also completely, tied up to yours. It really, it's a really vulnerable thing to do, but at the same time, it'll help, I think, really create more stickiness within the communities that you're trying to work with. Like, ask people what they're thinking about, what is bothering them, what do they love, and you will get the kind of answers that will inform your work and definitely give you an opportunity to do some good stuff with them.
Great. You mentioned the Lit Bar, which I have ordered from several times, and I know that you have your coffee shop, and that some, there are some other kind of local businesses. I'm curious about how local entrepreneurs sort of get engaged in Hunts Point in neighborhoods where there has, where it's been challenging to kind of amass capital or, kind of finance these kinds of projects. Like how are the, obviously people are committed to the neighborhood, which is, I think a huge benefit, obviously, to everybody, as you've said, but how do these people kind of get off the ground?
Right.
How do we encourage that?
I mean, structurally, it is incredibly hard. Like how I did it, I made money outside of the community, when I was as a consultant, doing, all sorts of projects. And then I had to invest it all, in my community, mostly because like I didn't know what I didn't know. And so, and the fact it was rather difficult, to access capital. So first of all, I didn't know it was available. And then after that, it was just sort of like, there are structural barriers, to women of color getting access to capital. Those things are real. But I feel like one of the things that I have been able to do and that I see other folks doing, and that is the kind of thing that we're going to be pushing. And I really do hope that, especially as things start, you're going through your changes, in CLEO's area as well, the area that CLEO serves, is there already are leaders there. And, I think if 2020 didn't showed us a lot, right? Or rather it exposed what a lot of us already knew, frankly, that in particular, the most challenged communities, were the ones that actually have historically been denied all sorts of things. But this is an opportunity now to recognize and undo some of those harms that have impacted ours, not just environmentally, but economically as well. And you find that they're related. One of the things that we're going to try to do, and we've done in a small scale, is that we've actually made connections with local landowners that actually do have, very cheap space. And because we've got the good credit, we will actually take over some of those leases. And then what we do is we lease them out to other small businesses who don't have the credit. And then we work with them to make sure that it's good with like low cost, rents. But that's sort of like a very small version of the kind of thing that I think does need to happen. And I'm, hoping that people, in your communities, because especially since I know you're, just climate change, like the places where poor people were stuck in, those are becoming more attractive. How do we ensure that those are the same folks that are actually benefiting and not being pushed out, as climate, continues to impact the way land is used in those communities. Now the low-lying areas are getting to the point where, people, the wealthier people that live there are looking at the areas like a little further, inland. And it's just sort of like, traditionally, those would have been the people that are kicked out. And we're also experiencing that right now. Are there opportunities? Are we asking, for the right ways to structurally set up, whether it's through funds and financing, so that people within our own communities are the ones who are actively benefiting first, to help retain their property so that they're not falling victims of predatory speculators, so that they're actually the ones who are benefiting in terms of having access to capital to build the kind of businesses that they need to build and stay and create wealth within their own communities. And those are the type of that, when people talk about, well, what can I do? It's like, what can financing institutions do? What can banks, what can philanthropy do? Those are the type of things that we're talking about. Like, these are things you can actually do that will impact people in ways to make their communities more resilient. Because right now it is about economic as well as environmental resilience. But if we can put people in the positions where they're more economically resilient within their own communities, if we're creating more opportunities for generational wealth for them, business creation, home ownership, they'll be okay in the long term. Unlike what we have now, where we're looking at the impacts of like lack of, wealth creation and generational wealth in communities like ours. And then we're going like, oh, wow, that kind of sucks to be them. It's like, now, that infrastructure was created. Now we have the opportunity to undo it.
I guess I kind of building on that. I mean, what are you, I obviously there's a different kind of governance structure in New York, but what are kind of the ways that you have been found to successfully engage with, electeds in your communities to either, create policies like you've worked on towards green roofs, or, take advantage of other policies, or kind of advocate for policies that can be, used in your communities and transferable elsewhere?
Right. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I worked on project-based development, because we always felt that good projects can inform good policies. And that's literally where the green roof tax abatement came out of. Because we showed that we could do a project that actually had the capacity to retain stormwater, to do all these things. It literally funneled into the state's long-term pollution control plan, and in that we were able to add in things like job creation. And it was just that stuff didn't exist until we said, look, these are the kind of things that we're doing. We're showing what can happen if you do this. And that fed into, additionally, the tax abatement. None of those things would have happened unless we had actually done it first. Because at that point, we literally had policymakers saying utter nonsense. We would talk about, we'd publish white papers about, green roofs and other sustainable developments that were happening in Europe. And they were like, well, things are different over there. It's the way water moves and the way urban heat island, it really, it was just psychotic. But again, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And that was the way that policymakers often look at stuff. We've been doing it this way all along. What else are we going to do? So we really have been, I'm a big proponent of showing and not just telling, because nobody cares what you tell them. They just don't.
Right. No, I think that, yeah.
Sorry.
Down. I wrote this one on my phone in the middle of the night, so I don't mean to make my eye contact go away. But I imagine that there are cities across the country that have come to you trying to sort of replicate the conditions that you've created in Hunts Point. How do you sort of spot places where this kind of reimagining might be possible? What are the attributes that you think a place has to have in place, and what are some of the non-starters to that?
Oh, I think that there isn't a community in the country that doesn't have everything that it needs in order to grow. What we often don't have, is the will to do that, because, I don't believe that there's any, that communities don't have we have a shortage of talent within our communities that can actually start making things happen. What we have, is this rather pervasive attitude that the talent doesn't stay there, and that brain drain is real, and that those folks should measure success by how far they get away from them, and that poverty is actually, a problem to manage, not solve. So the second is good. And I think, and also in my book, I give examples of just regular people who've decided that, their community is worth sticking around in. And, and they're as diverse as Native American reservations in Alaska, and we were went to Canada, to a woman who lost her son to gun violence in a community very similar to an inner city here. And, and how she just was my kid died because the lack of opportunities in areas like this just leads people to do stupid things. And I lost my son. So she's just literally to help transform, that area that she was from, through local economic developments. And it was just these are the things we're going to be pushing for. So part of it is first of all, just acknowledging, it's stop looking outside, of your community and support what's there. Because if given the opportunity, people will support themselves. But we also have to instill this idea that talent retention is an important approach to community development. And I've been actually thinking about this and saying this a lot, because people are well, is, actually I can't remember the name of the woman who spoke before. It's women have to either they're can't do anything, or they're have to be superheroes. And it's really, people? But anyway, I feel the same way about whenever I've asked questions well, is this talent retention approach that you're doing, you think you could do it? Is it going to solve gentrification? No, I don't think it's gonna, completely. However, but what I do know is that gentrification will not be solved at all, won't even be addressed if we don't do talent retention. Because we're literally saying to folks that are already there that you should leave. We're literally extracting value from our communities and thinking it's okay because we love a Cinderella story, in America. We love it anywhere, but we especially love it here. Pull yourself up from your bootstraps, get out of the neighborhood you're from, and and then you can see how you blow up when you go elsewhere. It's like, why aren't we like creating like the emotional and the economic, and I think even the spiritual, infrastructure that allows people to want to reinvest in their own hoods? That's something we have to really think about. But there are folks, present company included, who's like, that's what we do, and all I want to do is like help other people, consider that, like literally give those communities a second look. And I am absolutely hoping that policymakers will see that as value too.
Thanks for that. I have one last question. I mean, I have a lot, but one I want to ask you, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I think, history will show that you are one of the people who's really moved the needle in new ways in considering economic viability, vitality, livability. Who has inspired your work, either with their leadership style or their focus on seeing untapped potential like you have?
The list is like ridiculously long. Some of them are absolutely in my book. People like Dune Lankard, who's a native Eyak tribal member in Alaska, who literally, I think, changed the trajectory, of his tribe and his part of Alaska when they, absolutely said no to the kind of logging that was going to destroy their community. And now they're trying to do kelp farming, as a way to really create more support for their, for their culture and also their economic future. One of my very first mentors, even before I understood what a mentor was a woman named Leslie Lowe, who led the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. And she created just this unbelievable, like, she was so powerful, but also like saw in me, who didn't know anything about what I was doing, but just loved my community. And she saw that as a way, as something that should be nurtured and supported, and so that I could build on that. Yolanda Garcia, who also passed away, who was one of the first people who decided to, when it's part of like urban renewal, when the city was trying to tell them all to leave, she was like, no, we're going to stay and we're going to be a part of the rebuilding in our communities. And so I had models like that, who still inspire me. And just like, frankly, people in my community right now who see themselves, I think, in very different ways and see themselves as actually like real standard bearers for their community and who see value in it, on an emotional level. In addition to like the other, piece where people are like wanting to hold on to their homes, as opposed to sell them to a predatory speculator because they're like, why am I believing this like nonsense that our communities aren't worth anything? Like, no, like we see it and we want to keep it for ourselves and our future generations. And so things like that inspire me to no end.
That's great. Okay, well, we have some great questions from the audience. This one follows up nicely, I think. Carolyn is asking, how can we improve communities without displacing residents through gentrification? It seems like adding those elements that benefit the community drive up rental and mortgage prices.
Yeah, so two things, on that. First of all, I think we need to just sort of like nuance the idea of what gentrification is. So because when you do, you kind of have to look at it in a different way. One, is that it is the result of reurbanization, period. That there are opportunities, that there, but this is the first time ever in American history where we've had people who are like the age of baby boomers and millennials looking at the same land for what it can offer. Things like, access to transit, if people will trade bigger homes for smaller ones, as long as there's access to like the kind of like livable, walkable communities. And then the other thing is that we are not, because of like craziness around density, we're not actually building enough to meet the supply for demand for anything and anybody. We're just not. So we have to recognize that and really sort of be pushing policymakers, and ourselves on what does that actually mean. I mean, here in the South Bronx, like one of the attacks that I got was because we could actually build up on do more. Zoning actually allows us to build actually more on top of our buildings, and so I was just like, add ADUs up there. Like we have no place else to go but up. We can't really do a whole lot in other ways. And there were people who were just like, you can't do that. And it was just like, why not? Like, it's your building. You can do all sorts of things. But again, knee-jerk reactions to it. And I think that's something we have to like acknowledge. Like people still having babies, in particular communities like mine, when, Latina women have 2 kids by the time they're 20. So it's like, we have to be thinking about like what's happening in the future if we're seriously going to address it. But the other piece around, how we deal, and again, the talent retention strategy that I'm talking about isn't necessarily going to solve gentrification, but it can help like slow it down a little bit, in particular if we're acknowledging that there are people who are in our communities who actually sell their properties to predatory speculators, because that also actually helps drive up the prices when there's not, because what we often don't acknowledge, and especially with homeowners that are also multifamily homeowners, they are not only entrepreneurs, but they are actually sources for affordable housing. And the second we lose them, then we turn the tide for someone else to come in and actually create the kind of, extra value for gentrifiers or whatever. I mean, I just think that's a gross word, but anyway, that's what we do as well. So we have to think about this more long-term. How do we protect the people that actually are in those communities now so they can stay in their homes and not just assume that gentrification is this wave that just like pulls people. It's actually, by the time you start seeing, coffee shops and places that didn't have them before, it's already been happening. And primarily we have not been preparing the people in the communities for the real estate trends that are happening. And we need to take responsibility for that. Because we don't. Like, I'm sorry, the home ownership rate in my neighborhood has gone from like 20-some% down to less than 7%. The Department of Finance has watched those 6-figure deals for less than the land was assessed for go into the hands of holding companies and predatory speculators and been okay with it. So why don't we start there? And then let's have this conversation 5 years from now. That's what I'd like to see happen, as opposed to just like flipping out now. But right now, let's like save what we can and help get people more involved in the real estate game going forward.
Great, thanks for that. Caroline Lewis asks if you had to leave to develop your vision, or did you think that you would have seen the potential of your community?
Oh, that's a good question. No, I didn't see any potential in the community. If my film career had worked out and I had been, writing the way that I wanted to and writing the Great American Screenplay, I'd have been like, no, I never would have looked back. But it's important, but once there, and again, it was mostly because I had a little bit of education and some distance to see that our community was being treated a certain way because we were poor and of color. And so when I saw that, that's when I realized, well, why can't we have the kind of things that would make our lives easier and better and more wonderful? And that's when I decided things needed to change. And so that's when the vision for the kind of community that I knew we deserved, sort of came to be.
Ellen is asking, what are your current projects?
Oh, sure. Oh, I love these. So we, developed the Boogie Down Grind, which is a third space. Urbanists like to use that phrase as it's neither work nor home. But the way we think of it is like those third spaces are the kind of places where community is built. Like community is not just a place, it's an activity. Yeah, you need a place to do it, and you want those places to make people feel like they're encouraged, to be around them. So that's why, you have cool places that people hang out in, frankly, and that's why we built them. So that's one of them. We're really excited about that. We acquired a former rail station that we're transforming into an event hall, and we're using it specifically, part of the capital stack as we're redeveloping it is going to be comprised of community investments, because we're taking advantage of the Security and Exchange Commission's new regulations or new-ish regulations that allow small investors to invest in real estate development projects for the same rate of return as much larger investments. But for us, it gives people an opportunity to be involved in the real estate developments within their own communities and to see how that process works to make it less scary for them to do it in the future. And so it's people really exciting. Oh, and then also we've got a pretty big multifamily mixed income project happening out in Indianapolis, which we're very excited about, which will have about 150 units of both rental and home ownership, mixed income, and also about 200,000 square foot commercial light manufacturing food production facility, as well as a smaller spot for small lot food manufacturers and retail businesses as well.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, it is super, really fun.
And our last question for now is from Johan, who asks, how do we address the seeming conflict between generational wealth acquisition for lower to middle income, often people of color, by selling their urban properties high and retaining these neighborhoods' cultural character?
What's interesting is that the way people keep, did you get rid of that question? Because I was hoping.
No, I don't know what happened. Oh, wait, hold on.
Let me see.
There it is.
Where'd it go?
Hold on, I'm going to send it.
Oh, there it goes. Okay, I see it.
Okay.
You put it back there. Yeah, because I just want to make sure that I was getting it. The conflict between generational wealth acquisition for lower to middle income by selling. So but that question, I think that is a conflict, because if they're selling their urban properties, that's not maintaining generational wealth. They're selling it. And usually what happens when they do that, at least in our experience, like nationwide, they're actually not even selling it for as much as it's worth, because they don't know the value of it. And what they've done with this asset by literally selling it is negating their generational wealth, because there's not much to pass down. And especially if they didn't know enough to sell for what it was worth, they're probably not going to keep that money. And that's what happens. That is literally what happens, like all across the country. So basically what we're trying to address, with the examples that we keep putting forward around home ownership and local business development, is that people need to stay in the game. Like the fact that, white flight happened, and federal highway construction happened and really jacked up a bunch of our communities, and that's when people of color were able to buy those properties, and suddenly reurbanization happening, and it's those same places that are actually becoming more desirable and being gentrified. That's when we should be like, no, I'm gonna stay here and I'm going to hold on to my land. I mean, that's really the reason why there's such a huge wealth gap between white folks and people of color. I mean, yes, there's also like the 400 years of entitlement programs that went to white people, but there's also just the simple fact that many people of color in those communities sell their homes because they don't know what the value of what it actually was and what it would mean for their future going forward, because there hasn't been a whole lot of support for us to really even understand that. You know, and I could say that in full disclosure, and it's in my book, so it's not like it's like a secret. But my family, the house that my father bought back in the 1940s, you know, I'm the youngest of 10. I could not get my siblings, my big brothers and sisters, to keep the family home because they saw zero value in holding onto the property in, you know, in a low status community. They were like, it's cute what you do, baby, but, you know, we like that you're like a community minded person, blah, blah, blah. But we're gonna go because this is the best we're gonna get. That house is now worth 3 times what it was sold for. Could have, you know, it's like, I don't have any children, but it could have gone to the families, you know, my siblings who do have children, but instead it sits nicely on the balance sheet, you know, of a predatory speculating holding company. I don't want that to happen to anybody in our communities anymore. But first we have to realize that, like, the way, you know, white America, you know, has basically been able to literally have like 10 times, you know, more wealth than most Black families do. It's because they own something, period. It's really that simple. So the wealth that they're creating by getting a little bit that's not wealth. It's not. That'll go away real soon. So those are the things we have to like keep telling folks. The same things that got, you know, white communities in a better position in this country are the same things that are going to help us. It's real wealth, not just money. It's wealth. Big difference.
On that note, I am going to thank you so much. This was such a treat for me, and I'm sure for everybody to hear from you. And I cannot wait to read your book and
Thank you.
Learn more. And I will turn it back over to Yoka and Olivia. But thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, Marjora Carter. Thank you, Jen. This was such an enriched conversation, one that we know all too well here in South Florida and here in Miami-Dade County. And so we have come to the end of our program, but hopefully the beginning of our own increased agency to solve the climate crisis